Imagine waking up tomorrow morning. You walk to your kitchen. You turn on the tap. You pour yourself a glass of water, and you drink it. Now imagine finding out, years later, that water was slowly poisoning you, that it had been poisoning you for decades, that the company responsible knew about it, that the government knew about it, that your doctors couldn't explain why you were sick because nobody was allowed to tell them the truth. That's not a movie plot. That happened. In America. In West Virginia. And it went on for over 50 years. This is the story of PFOA, a chemical so toxic, so persistent, so deeply embedded in modern life that scientists call it the forever chemical. Because it never breaks down. Not in the environment, not in your body. And this is the story of one lawyer, a man who was supposed to spend his career defending corporations, who accidentally stumbled onto the biggest environmental cover-up in American history. His name was Wilbur Bilott, and what he uncovered will change the way you look at your water, your food, your blood, forever. Stay with me, because this story goes deeper than you can imagine. It's 1998, Parkersburg, West Virginia. A cattle farmer named Wilbur Tennant is watching his herd die. Not one or two animals, not a disease passing through the herd. One by one, then 10 by 10, his cattle are collapsing. Their teeth are turning black. Their eyes are growing large, glassy, filled with some kind of liquid. Their organs are rotting from the inside. Calves are being born deformed, some with no eyes, some with twisted faces, some dead before they even hit the ground. By the time Wilbur picks up the phone, 190 of his cattle are dead. He's filmed all of it. Hours and hours of footage on a handheld camcorder. Dead cows with black stomachs. A creek running behind his property that's turned a strange, bubbling color. Fields that smell wrong. Trees near the water that have no leaves, even in spring. Wilbur knows what's upstream from his farm. Everyone in Parkersburg knows. The DuPont plant. Washington Works, a massive DuPont chemical manufacturing facility sitting just upstream from Wilbur's land. One of the most important industrial plants in the country. Thousands of jobs, generations of families employed there. A cornerstone of the local economy. DuPont, for those who don't know, is one of the oldest and most powerful chemical companies in American history. Founded in 1802. They made gunpowder for the U.S. military. They invented nylon, Kevlar, Lycra, and, most importantly for this story, they invented and manufactured Teflon, the non-stick coating on your pans, the lining in your microwave popcorn bags, the waterproofing on your Gore-Tex jacket, the coating inside fast food wrappers. DuPont's Teflon was everywhere. It was a billion-dollar product, and making it required a chemical called PFOA, perfluorooctanoic acid. Wilbur Tennant had no idea what PFOA was. He didn't know the science. He just knew his cows were dying. He knew the creek was wrong, and he knew it had something to do with DuPont. But nobody would listen to him. Local doctors couldn't explain the symptoms. State regulators said there was nothing they could do. Neighbors were afraid to speak up. Half of them worked at the DuPont plant. The local government wasn't going to bite the hand that fed the entire region. So Wilbur did what desperate people sometimes do. He called a lawyer. Robert Bilott was not the kind of lawyer you'd expect to take on a case like this. He was a partner at Taft, Stettinius & Hollister, a prestigious corporate law firm in Cincinnati, Ohio. He had spent his entire career defending chemical companies. He knew how these corporations thought, how they operated, how they buried inconvenient information. He was one of them. His grandmother happened to know Wilbur Tennant's family. That's the only reason Wilbur's call got through. When Rob saw Wilbur's videotapes, something shifted in him, something he couldn't shake. He agreed to look into it. Not to file a lawsuit, just to look. He sent a letter to DuPont asking for documents related to the creek, the waste disposal near Tennant's farm, and any chemicals that might have been released into the local watershed. DuPont responded. They sent him 110,000 documents. Now, a cynical person might say they did that on purpose. Flood the lawyer with so much paper that he can't find anything useful. Drown the investigation in data. But Rob Bilott was not a normal person. He read every single document. It took him months. And what he found inside those 110,000 pages, buried in technical reports, internal memos, and corporate studies going back to the 1950s, was something that made his blood run cold. DuPont knew. They had known for decades. Let's talk about PFOA, because you need to understand what this chemical actually is. PFOA stands for perfluorooctanoic acid. It belongs to a class of compounds called PFAS, per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances. Scientists have a nickname for them: forever chemicals. Here's why. PFAS compounds are built around one of the strongest chemical bonds in nature, the carbon-fluorine bond. It's almost unbreakable. No bacteria in the soil can break it down. Sunlight can't break it down. Water can't break it down. Biological processes in your body can't break it down. Once PFOA enters your bloodstream, it stays there. It builds up over time. It accumulates in your liver, your kidneys, your blood plasma. And it just sits there. For years. Possibly for the rest of your life. Now here's what DuPont's own internal documents showed. As early as the 1950s, DuPont scientists began studying the health effects of PFOA. They found it was harmful to animals. They found it could penetrate the skin. They found it accumulated in the blood. By the 1960s, they knew it was showing up in the bloodstreams of their own workers at the Washington Works plant. In the 1970s, a DuPont study of female workers found that PFOA caused birth defects. Specifically, facial malformations in the children of women who had been exposed. DuPont quietly moved pregnant women away from areas with PFOA exposure, but they didn't tell the workers why. And they didn't tell the government. By the 1980s, they knew PFOA was leaching from their landfills into the local water supply in Parkersburg. They tested local residents' blood. They found PFOA in it. And they did not report this to regulators. They did not tell the public. They buried the data. Throughout the 1990s, as Wilbur Tennant's cows were dying, DuPont was still dumping PFOA-laden waste into unlined pits on their property. Waste that was flowing directly into the creek that ran through Wilbur's farm. All of this was in the documents. Rob Bilott sat in his office in Cincinnati, surrounded by boxes of paper, and he realized he wasn't just looking at a case of a farmer's dead cows. He was looking at one of the largest corporate cover-ups in American history. In 2001, Rob Bilott did something almost no one in his position would have done. He filed a class action lawsuit against DuPont on behalf of approximately 70,000 residents in 6 water districts around Parkersburg, West Virginia. People whose drinking water had been contaminated with PFOA for years. Let that number sink in. 70,000 people, an entire region, drinking poisoned water without knowing it. DuPont fought back with everything they had. They were a company worth tens of billions of dollars. They had an army of lawyers. They had political connections. They had the entire machinery of corporate legal defense at their disposal. They filed motion after motion. They delayed. They disputed. They buried Rob in paperwork. His own law firm started to question whether this case was worth pursuing. It wasn't making money. It was consuming resources. It was going nowhere fast. Rob kept going. The lawsuit dragged on for years. Then something remarkable happened. As part of the settlement negotiations in 2004, DuPont agreed to fund an independent scientific study to determine whether PFOA exposure was actually linked to disease in the affected population. They agreed to be bound by whatever the science found. They probably thought the science would be inconclusive, or take too long, or be too expensive to complete. They were wrong. Over the next 7 years, a panel of independent scientists analyzed blood samples from over 69,000 people in the contaminated area. They cross-referenced their PFOA blood levels with their medical histories. They looked for patterns. What they found was devastating. PFOA exposure was probably linked, the scientific panel's exact phrase, to 6 diseases: kidney cancer, testicular cancer, thyroid disease, ulcerative colitis, high cholesterol, and pregnancy-induced hypertension. 6 diseases, 70,000 people, 50 years of contamination. And DuPont had known the whole time. Let's pause here and talk about what this fight cost Rob Bilott personally. Because this story isn't just about corporate evil. It's about what it takes to stand up to it. Rob spent 17 years of his life on this case, from 1998 to 2015, the prime years of his career. His law firm almost dropped him. He fought to keep the case alive. He worked nights. He worked weekends. His health suffered. His relationships suffered. He developed a neurological condition. His body began trembling uncontrollably from stress. At one point, his doctors weren't sure what was happening to him. He kept going. He wasn't the kind of man who gave speeches. He wasn't an activist by nature. He was a quiet, methodical, deeply stubborn attorney from Cincinnati who simply could not let go of what he had seen in those documents. In 2017, his story was published as a landmark New York Times Magazine piece called "The Lawyer Who Became DuPont's Worst Nightmare." In 2019, it became the film Dark Waters, directed by Todd Haynes and starring Mark Ruffalo as Rob Bilott. The film is remarkable because it doesn't sensationalize. It shows the grinding, exhausting, unglamorous reality of taking on a corporation that has virtually unlimited resources and zero incentive to stop lying. There's a moment in the film where Rob is told, "They're never going to stop. They have more money than God and more lawyers than the devil." And Rob just keeps going anyway. In 2017, DuPont and its spin-off company Chemours agreed to pay $671 million to settle approximately 3,500 personal injury claims from residents in the Parkersburg area. $671 million sounds like a lot of money, but let's put it in context. DuPont's revenue in 2017 was approximately $26 billion. The settlement amounted to roughly 2.5% of a single year's revenue. For a company that had knowingly poisoned an entire community for 50 years. No DuPont executive was criminally charged. No DuPont scientist who buried the health data went to prison. The company paid a fine that, for them, amounted to a rounding error. And they moved on. PFOA itself was eventually phased out of U.S. manufacturing in 2013, not because of government regulation, but because DuPont and other manufacturers voluntarily agreed to stop using it, under pressure from the EPA. But here's the thing about forever chemicals. They're forever. The PFOA that DuPont dumped into the ground in West Virginia in the 1950s is still there. It's still in the water table. It's still in the bloodstreams of people who drank that water for decades. It doesn't go away. And when DuPont phased out PFOA, they didn't stop using PFAS chemicals entirely. They switched to newer compounds that are chemically similar to PFOA, but technically different enough to not be regulated. Some of these replacement chemicals are now showing up in water supplies across the country, and scientists are just beginning to study their health effects. The story didn't end with the settlement. In many ways, it was just beginning. Here's where this story stops being about West Virginia and starts being about every single one of us. In 2015, the Environmental Working Group and a team of researchers began a nationwide study of PFAS contamination in U.S. water supplies. What they found was staggering. PFAS chemicals had contaminated the drinking water of an estimated 200 million Americans, more than 60% of the U.S. population. Not just in West Virginia, in Michigan, in California, in New York, in Texas, in North Carolina. Everywhere there were military bases that used PFAS-containing firefighting foam. Everywhere there were industrial plants. Everywhere there were non-stick cookware manufacturers, food packaging companies, waterproofing factories. PFAS is in the blood of 97% of Americans, according to the CDC, including newborn babies, passed from mother to child in the womb and through breast milk. It's in the blood of polar bears in the Arctic, in the bodies of fish in remote mountain lakes, in rainwater on every continent on Earth, including Antarctica. In 2022, the EPA found detectable levels of PFAS in 45% of tap water samples collected from across the country. This is not a West Virginia problem. This is not an industrial corridor problem. This is everywhere. The forever chemicals are in us, in all of us. Right now, I want you to think about a woman named Bucky Bailey. Bucky's mother worked at the DuPont plant in Parkersburg during her pregnancy in the early 1980s. She was exposed to PFOA. Bucky was born with a severe facial deformity. His nostril was fused shut. His eye was partially malformed. He spent his childhood in surgery after surgery, trying to correct what the chemical had done to his face before he was born. He was one of only 2 cases of facial birth defects among children born to DuPont workers in that era. DuPont knew. They had tracked his case. They had documented it internally. And they had told no one. When Bucky's case became part of Rob Bilott's lawsuit, he was finally able to put a name to what had happened to him. He was finally able to say, "This wasn't random. This wasn't bad luck. This was done to me." Think about the thousands of people in Parkersburg who developed kidney cancer, testicular cancer, thyroid disease, and spent years not knowing why, blaming themselves, thinking it was genetics or diet or just bad fortune. It wasn't. Someone had made a choice, a corporate choice, a calculated decision that the profit from Teflon was worth more than the health of the people living near the plant. That decision was made by human beings, in boardrooms, with full knowledge of what they were doing. One of the most disturbing aspects of this story is how thoroughly the government failed. The EPA is supposed to protect Americans from exactly this kind of corporate contamination. That's its entire reason for existing. But PFOA was never regulated under the Safe Drinking Water Act. It was never given a legal limit. It was never classified as a hazardous substance under federal law. Why? Because regulating a chemical requires evidence. And the evidence was owned by DuPont. Under American law, when a company manufactures a new chemical, they're required to report health data to the EPA. DuPont did report some of its PFOA data, but they were selective. They buried the worst findings. And the EPA, understaffed and under-resourced, didn't dig deeper. It wasn't until Rob Bilott's case forced thousands of pages of internal DuPont documents into the public record that regulators were able to see the full picture. In 2016, the EPA finally issued a health advisory for PFOA. But a health advisory is not a legal limit. It's not enforceable. Utilities weren't required to do anything about it. It wasn't until 2024 that the EPA finally issued the first federal drinking water standard for PFAS chemicals. It took 70 years from when DuPont first knew PFOA was harmful to when the U.S. government issued a binding legal limit on it in drinking water. 70 years. So where does this leave us today? The good news, and there is some, is that awareness of PFAS contamination has exploded since Rob Bilott's case became public. Scientists, journalists, and regulators around the world are now paying attention in a way they never were before. The 2024 EPA drinking water standards are a significant step. Several states have enacted even stricter standards. There are now thousands of PFAS-related lawsuits working their way through the American court system. 3M, another major PFAS manufacturer, agreed to pay up to $10.3 billion to settle claims from public water systems in 2023. That's the largest water contamination settlement in U.S. history. Rob Bilott himself hasn't stopped. He published a book called Exposure, documenting the full story of his case. He continues to work on PFAS litigation. But here's the hard truth. The forever chemicals are already out there. They're already in the water. They're already in our blood. Cleanup is extraordinarily expensive. Some estimates suggest that fully remediating PFAS contamination in U.S. water systems could cost hundreds of billions of dollars. And the companies that put them there? Most have paid settlements. None have faced criminal accountability. None of the executives who made the decision to hide the health data have gone to prison. I know what you're thinking. This is terrifying. What can I actually do about it? Fair question. The Environmental Working Group has a free online tool, the EWG Tap Water Database, where you can type in your zip code and see what contaminants, including PFAS, have been detected in your local water supply. Use it. Not all filters remove PFAS. Standard carbon filters like most Brita pitchers do not effectively remove PFAS. But reverse osmosis systems and filters certified to remove PFAS by NSF International do work. Be aware of PFAS in food packaging. Microwave popcorn bags, fast food wrappers, greasy pizza boxes, many of these still contain PFAS coatings. Transfer food to non-coated containers when you can. Check your cookware. Non-stick pans that are scratched or damaged can release PFAS into your food. Consider switching to cast iron, stainless steel, or ceramic alternatives. And stay informed. Regulatory decisions about PFAS are made by agencies whose leadership is appointed by elected officials. Know where your representatives stand on chemical regulation and clean water. This is a policy issue as much as a scientific one. None of these things fully solve the problem, but they're not nothing. I want to end this story with something bigger than water filters. Because the PFOA story isn't really just about one chemical, or one company, or one community in West Virginia. It's about a system. A system in which corporations are allowed to self-report health data on chemicals they manufacture. A system in which the burden of proof falls on regulators to prove that something is dangerous, rather than on manufacturers to prove that it's safe. A system in which the legal process is so long, so expensive, and so technically complex that the only people who can successfully navigate it are rare individuals like Rob Bilott, who happen to have both the expertise and the sheer stubbornness to spend 17 years of their life on a single case. There are thousands of synthetic chemicals in commercial use in the United States today. Most of them have never been fully tested for health effects. Most of them have no legal limits in drinking water. We don't know what the next PFOA is, but history suggests there probably is one, sitting in someone's internal documents right now, known to someone in a boardroom, filed away in a memo.